Hey, what's going on everyone? Austin Hargett here, aka Dr. Weldz, and I'm here to shoot a video on a 6G weld for Weld.com. Let's get after it. The first thing we got to ask ourselves is why a 6G weld? You see a bunch of pipes in our beautiful planet that go up and down and left and right, but you rarely ever see them go at a 45-degree angle. Our 2G horizontal weld is a fairly easy weld, and we're only getting a horizontal progression on that weld. 2G weld's having a difficulty as far as undercut and overlap of that weld, having a bit of a sag in your bead. The 5G, being that we have to do a lot of overhead and vertical progression, tends to get a lot more undercut and is a lot more uncomfortable. The 6G weld is going to take a little bit of both of those aspects and combine them into one position. And once we're in that position, we get a little bit of that difficulty of being on bottom and forward, as well as having it at this angle and having that gravity pulling on our top toes and still creating a bit of overlap if we're not careful. Again, because it takes some of the difficulties from each of these positions, it qualifies you for each of these positions. When you take a weld test on a 6G pipe, you are qualified for all position welding. Now, the other trick to this, if you look down here, 6G 2-inch extra heavy wall is one of the most common weld tests in this industry. Now, the process could be different, could change, but the reason why that is one of the most common weld tests in this industry is because the pipe position qualifies you for all position welding. The thickness of the pipe, being that it's really thick, qualifies you for all thicknesses. And the 2-inch pipe, being that it's much smaller and more difficult to weld than, say, a 6-inch pipe, is going to qualify you for all sizes. So the company's going to want to take you on a weld test, do a 6G weld on a double extra heavy wall pipe on a 2-inch size pipe. Now, that's not going to qualify you for different processes. If you're going to qualify for different processes, you're going to need to change procedures. So here we have our weld coupon. Right here I have a 2-inch pipe. It's about schedule 120. Now this isn't the pipe that's going to be on your weld test that qualifies you for all thicknesses. It needs to be a little thicker. But at the end, this is still a good example pipe. We'll be able to do a little bit of TIG welding. We'll be able to do a bit of stick welding and still see those staggered tie-ins and still have to plan our fills on the way out towards the cap. Not only that, but I have it at a perfect 45-degree angle. Now, once it's at this 45-degree angle, you need to be sure you do not move this pipe. A lot of QCs and stuff will double check where you set it and where you put it, and once it's there, it cannot move. And if it does, it might cost you your job. Now, I've got a few tips to go along with this video. And these tips are for 6G welds in particular, and pipe welding in general. There's my one basic rule that you need for pipe welding, and that is body positioning is key. If your body's not in the right spot and you don't have the right stance, you're going to make that weld a lot harder than it is. Plan for where you're going and not for where you're at. Don't ever start yourself where you're going to be. Start yourself about where you're going to finish and lean into where you're going to start. That's going to help you move alongside this pipe. Since it is a pipe and you have to move around it, if you stop moving, you're going to find yourself in a bind. Keep your head in front of your torch as much as you can. So that means if your torch is moving up the side of the pipe, that means your head does too. And if your head's moving, that means your body's got to move too. So the smaller the pipe, the more quicker you need to transition around it. The bigger the pipe, the smaller transitions you can make. But what's very important is that you just keep ahead of your torch. That way you can see what you're doing, and you don't ever fall over yourself. The next tip is start on your hard side first. This makes the tie-ins a little easier. Now this is a preference for me on a 6G weld, comparatively saying like a 5G. On a 5G weld, there is no hard side to it. You don't have to switch hands or be in an uncomfortable position. You just simply mirror what you did on the other side. Whereas a 6G weld, it's not quite the same. We have to weld in an uphill or downhill progression, so we can't just go up one side and down the other. We have to make sure we start at one point from the bottom and go to the top for this example. So in that case, the right side of the pipe is going to be more difficult for me. I like to start it first. That way I can get what I can on the hard side. And then as I come up the easy side, it's easier for me to see my tie-ins. You want to keep a nice wide stance. If you keep your feet too close together, you're going to find yourself falling over yourself. You need to keep a wide stance and move your weight from one leg to the other as you're transitioning around this pipe. That really helps. Today we're going to be doing a combo weld with TIG and stick 7018. So as far as the fit up, what I like is a nice loose gap, about a 5/32 or even a 3/16 gap. Got no land on this pipe, and I'm running 3 tacks. Okay, I've got 1 tack on this opposite side here, and I've got no tack on this side. Now I like to run the 3 tacks so I have a nice open side to run on. I don't have to worry about tying it into a tack, but I need that 3rd tack there as so nothing moves as I put my root in. I'm going to run my root pass close to about 85-90 amps. Like I said on my tips, I like to start with my hard side, being that I'm right-handed. If I'm looking at the pipe, the right side of this pipe is going to be my hard side. And we either pick. We want to be uncomfortable with our body, where we kind of have to bend over like Gumby and then make this weld. And as we're coming around, we need to take steps and move our body ahead and around. Again, that is the trick to these types of welds, is being able to position your body correctly. Now I can either, again, bend over all awkward, or I can simply mirror what I did with my right hand, but with my left hand. Now starting this out is going to be very difficult. It's going to feel really awkward, but as long as you're paying attention to what the TIG torch is doing and what your wire is doing, you shouldn't have any issues other than it just feeling awkward. Now in my case, it's not this hand that causes trouble. It's this wire hand that always likes to jab a little bit extra. So personally, on a weld like this, being that it is small and it is something that I can do with my right hand very easily, I prefer to do it with my right hand just for quality purposes. Today we're welding on a Lincoln FlexTech 350. I'm going to be running my root pass somewhere around 90-85 amps. I'm going to make sure we're set to TIG. We need to make sure our leads are set to DC negative, where my TIG torch is plugged into the negative terminal. Got my argon hose hooked up. I got my gas on. I'm good to go. When I first got started welding pipe, I had to freehand the bottom of my roots. It was just a lot easier for me. So I'm going to show you guys that. We're going to freehand this bottom, and as I come up to the top, I'll be able to come out of it, and we'll just walk it like normal. So I want y'all to see, again, looking at this pipe, I want to be on this side of it. That way, I can focus on this side, and I want a nice wide stance. I'm going to put a lot of my weight on this back leg, and as I work up the side of this pipe, I'm going to go into leaning onto this right leg. Focus my arc nice and tight. My root shouldn't be any wider than my gap, and once those edges, those puddles touch those bevels, I'm stepping up the side, I'm moving. This is where a lot of people get in trouble. They've made it up to the side here, but if they're flat-footed and they don't have that stance, they're going to be leaning into it trying to see, and they're going to fall over. So now we need to make sure either we need to adjust on the fly or make our tie-ins. Should always clean and feather your tie-ins before you get going. And we need to be further up on the side of this pipe so that we can see. Now once our hard side's complete, we just got to move on to the easy side. That's always easier to tie into. Now on these tie-ins, I'm being careful to make sure I'm holding my heat. Before I get started on the bottom here, I'm letting that puddle get established and get a little wet before I push in a tiny bit of filler on the bottom so as to not leave a little bit of suck back right on dead bottom. And as I come up to this side tack, I'm going to make sure that I come up to that tack, I'm going to dab that last little hole closed, and I'm going to hold my heat there on the side of that tack so as that it will actually drop into the low spot that I created by dabbing that hole closed. And I'll continue that technique as I come up the top of this pipe and on this last tie-in. I'll dab it closed and then just hold my heat there, tail out, beautiful root. Now that we've got our root pass in, it's pretty simple. We're going to go ahead and put a hot pass with TIG. Now if the procedure only allows me to put one more pass with TIG before I switch over to stick, I like to make my hot pass a little thicker. Try not to just carry just a little bit of metal, but I'm going to feed a little bit as to give myself a nice foundation for my stick welding. I'd much rather there be more TIG in here than stick. I'm going to try to cheat myself a little bit, and it's not necessarily cheating. The dead bottom of this, from 6 o'clock over to 5 and from 6 o'clock over to 7, they still consider that technically overhead. Same thing with the top right here, all the way at 12 o'clock, from 12 to 1 and 12 to 11, they consider that flat. So on your hard side, do as much of that as you can. So if you need to not start dead on 6 o'clock and you need to cheat yourself over a little bit because this is your hard side and you'd rather do less of it, that's fine. You just can't ever weld down the other side of the pipe. Okay, whether you're coming from the bottom here down or you're coming from the top down, you can't go down with this specific process. So make sure you're always working uphill and that you're not cheating too far over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach as far over here as I can with my torch so that I know that I'll be good on my easy side. I'm going to go up on amps from about 87 right now to about 135 to 150. Now that's kind of up to your preference. If you're too hot and you're too slow, you're going to suck back your root. So make sure that you handle whatever heat that you can in order to put a good hot pass in without affecting your root too much, if that's what you're going for. If you notice that you have spots of incomplete fusion or you have a big heavy spot, you need to fix them now so that we get a nice hot pass in there. Now I didn't quite make it all the way up to 0, and that's fine. All the way to the top of the pipe, because I'll be able to make that up on my good side. Now notice I don't like getting down on a knee. Getting down on a knee is a good alternative, especially when starting out, being down here. But on this 2-inch pipe, being that I have to move quickly as I get started, being on a knee is bad for me. I can't adjust on the fly. I'm going to need to stop. I'm going to need to make a tie-in. The more tie-ins, the more errors you could potentially make on this pipe. So if I can make from bottom to top without stopping, that's going to be my best bet. And if I'm on a knee, I'm going to need to stop about halfway so that I can stand up and reposition. So rather have a much wider stance so that I can move up and down as needed. You want to get a good habit of starting and stopping on your roots and your hot passes to pull in your arc and your puddle when you're ready to stop off to the thicker section of pipe. If you stop right in the middle of your root, you're liable to leave a fisheye, which is more or less a non-fused hole in your root. So pull that over to the bevel where it's thicker, it's not going to go all the way through, and you'll never leave a fisheye. Or you can tail out, make your puddle from really wide to really small, and you won't get that fisheye either. But make sure you don't get them, or you got to grind them out. And there's our tail out off to the side of the bevel. Very crucial right there. Now the TIG welding's done. Some say the hard part's over with. I disagree. The stick on the way out can get a lot more stressful than the TIG, in my opinion. We got to keep it clean. We got to keep it hot. We got to be looking for those porosity holes as we go. And if you're not careful, you can catch those a lot easier. So now we're going to switch over to stick. This is my TIG whip. It's in the negative. I need to take it out of the negative, put my ground into the negative, and then my stinger needs to be in the positive because 7018 loves being run DC positive. And if you don't, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Switch it over to stick. We're going to run 332nd size electrodes. So we're going to be running anywhere from 85 to 90 amps. Now, I'd rather stay hotter than not, so we're going to keep it closer to in between. Now, this arc control here, if I move it towards the positive side, I'm going to get a lot more dig. And if I lean it towards the negative side, it's going to kind of flatten out a little bit more and cause a little less dig. Now, don't use that as a crutch, but I would prefer welding 7018s on the soft side. I don't care to start on a knee. And again, if I'm starting on a knee, I'm going to end up having to stand up at some point. So if I'm down here on a knee, and I'm really comfortable right here. But one of my rules was plan for where you're going, not for where you're at. Right now I'm at the bottom of the pipe, but I'm going to need to get to the top. So if I start here and I'm really comfortable to this point, eventually as I come up, my stinger, my face, everything's going to be in the way. I'm going to need to transition my body. And then once I get halfway, I can't see the top of that puddle anymore. I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to make a tie-in. I like to be a nice wide stance, put my elbow down, and make sure that I can weld from bottom to top. Bottom to top. And again, this is a smaller size pipe. So this whole electrode, I'm probably not going to end up using. And if anyone knows, anyone who ever welded stick before, they know at the beginning, especially early in the morning, you're really shaky. So to kind of help prevent that, I go right above the numbers and I will break the flux apart so that I have a little bit of a shorter stick rod, and I find that that helps me out a lot more. So I'm going to go ahead and light up here. I'm going to do a 2B fill pass right over top of my hot pass. And again, just like your house was built, we're going to start on the bottom bevel and move up to the top. Don't ever try to fill top down. You'll have overlap issues. You'll end up trapping slag. You'll do a bunch of bad stuff. Okay. So we're going to start here on the bottom. The other thing I like to do is take the angle of my stick rod and go to the 45 down position. The reason why I prefer a 45 down position while I'm stick welding on this size pipe, it keeps my elbow from having to come way up to hold my rod angle. If I keep it like the normal way, as I come up the side of this pipe, I'm going to have to really pull my elbow up to maintain the angle that I need. You can see I've made my first weld. Before I go up that other side, every single time, you need to get a good habit of grinding that tie-in. Now grind that start down to make it look more like a crater, which you're typically used to tying into. So if you can get the start of the weld to be shaped and formed like a crater, by the time you strike up, tie into it, and come up the side of the pipe, it'll lay down a lot cleaner. If you ignore this step, you're likely to get two humps, two starts lined up right on top of each other. And a lot of the times, if you're not too careful, those humps are full of porosity. So that little bit of digging and grinding to clean up your tie-in, you might find some pinholes that you needed to get rid of, and you'll also make a nice, cleaner tie-in. So here it is now, nice and ground down. And you can even see that I found a little porosity. Now I need to keep grinding until I don't see that anymore. Now you'll typically find those pinholes at the start of your weld if you don't execute the start properly. Just simply lighting up and running from where you started, you're probably going to end up getting some porosity. You get porosity with a 7018, typically with a long arc length. And when you strike an arc, you got a long arc length. So you need to make sure you strike an arc, get close, come back to your tie-in, and make sure you burn out the trash that's in front of you. 7018 will burn it out what's in front, but if you leave it behind it, it's going to be staying there until you grind it out. So now we've got a plan to go up our hard side. And it only took one stick weld for me to break one of my rules, do your hard side first. Now the reason why I said that is so now when I try to make my tie-in on my hard side, it's harder to see where I'm tying into on that very bottom without being underneath it. And like I said before, I don't like being on a knee because that prevents me from being able to go from bottom to top. I typically have to make another tie-in on the side, and that's just more room for error. So like I said, we're going to go up this hard side next. I like to have that clamp there at the top so that I can rest my arm. Now I like to go about doing my hard side with stick two different ways. With TIG, we either got to pick being uncomfortable with our body or our left hand. Now that I'm working with stick, I'm simply going to again choke up on the stick rod, grab a little bit less of it. I'm going to go with my 45-degree down angle, and with this clamp, I can take my wide stance. Again, I'm on this side of the pipe. I've got a wide stance. I can use this clamp and put all my weight on my back leg, strike up, and as I come up the side of this pipe, I can transition. I'm going to end up having to take a step right about here in order to maintain a good, comfortable body positioning to get to that top tie-in. Or, like I did this side, which was a wide stance, bottom to top, I can do the same thing, but I just simply switch hands. I'm still using both of my hands, and in my opinion, it works a lot easier. I like using one technique more than the other. I'll use both for this simulation. So I'm going to start by switching to the left hand, coming all the way to the top of my tie-in. It's clean. It's laid into the other one pretty okay. It's a little heavy right here. So if you have a heavy spot in your field, don't be afraid to grind that down. Every step that you take on your way out of this pipe needs to be nice, flat, and even. If you expect to have a nice, flat, even weld, you need to weld over something that's nice, flat, and even. Now before I do anything cosmetic to this weld, I'm just going to go ahead and put that other bead that needs to be in there to complete this layer of fill. Then I'll go around and make sure the high spots are ground down and the low spills are filled up. Low spots are filled up. Shouldn't be a whole lot to grind. The better you get, less you got to grind. So again, before I was aiming down to that bottom edge, I need to change my rod angle and favor that top side so that it lays in there nice and flat and even. So I'm going to do the other technique besides switching hands. I'm going to do my hard side first. I'm going to get uncomfortable with my body and make my way up the side of this pipe. Do not skip the step of grinding that bottom tie-in. So now we got our first fill in with stick. It's looking good. You can see that I'm less full here than I am on the bottom. I got to keep that in mind. And that's one reason why I've done a little bit of grinding down here, to take some of the meat down off the bottom. Up the side looks good. Guys, it doesn't matter what process you're running, what position you're running, you need to plan those fills out. Every time you get a whole layer of fills done, grind down the high spots, fill in the low spots, and make sure everything is even before you put that next layer in. And the thicker the pipe, the more layers you got to plan for. So we got it the way we like it. Now we're just going to fill it up all the way to flush. Now I want to make sure that my bottom bevel has a little bit of bevel edge showing. I got to keep all my welds inside these bevel edges. If my welds jump out of those bevels, I'm losing my line for my cap. If I lose my line from my cap, it's going to make it wider. It's going to make it more ugly. So we need to make sure that as we come out, we're planning our fills, grinding down the low spots, filling in, grinding down the heavy spots, filling in the low spots, and then seeing where each bead needs to go. It doesn't matter if you got to put one bead right up the center. If that's what gets it flush, that's what you got to do. So make sure before you cap it, this pipe is flush without touching those bevel edges, which are your guides for your cap. All right, guys, and now we're nice and full. I got the top nice and full. I've had to do a little bit of grinding on my fills on the bottom side so that I'm even on the top and the bottom. Again, you want your final fill to be even all the way around so that your cap is even all the way around. If you got high spots, grind them down. If you got low spots, fill them in. Now, if you notice on my pipe, I've got a little bit of a bevel showing on bottom. That means I'm lower on the bottom than I am the top bevel. And that's for a certain reason. I like having my bevel showing on the bottom so that I, have somewhere I can follow, a good guideline that I can keep that first bead straight and where it needs to be. We all know if we mess up that first bead on the cap, typically going to mess up the rest of it. So it's very important that I have that good guideline. Now the reason why I leave a little bit more bevel showing is so that that weld has something to sit on. Like a 2G weld, everything wants to sag. So if I have a little bit of a bevel to catch it, I'll be able to catch it. Now the other thing is, when I go to start this cap, I'm not aiming for that edge. A lot of people want to start right on that edge to start their cap. That's going to put your cap really low and you're going to come up short for your final bead. Make sure you're still starting inside your bevel edges and you're just letting that cap come right outside those bevel edges and you'll have a nice uniform cap. That's it, guys. That's my video on completing a 6G 2-inch weld TIG stick 7018 all the way out Remember, be comfortable. It's all about body positioning, guys. Plan for where you're going, not for where you're at. Grind those tie-ins. Keep things clean. Keep things hot. That's the doctor's orders. And if you like what you saw today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. Y'all take it easy.